So my dad is up there playing guitar. This is the Lake Imonia Fish Camp. I've got Big Bird on board. We have not caught any fish yet, but we're gonna keep at it. That's my buddy James and his wife Chelsea on that boat. Yeah, it's happening up here. Little Johnny Cash. Burn, burn. Sing it, Ying.
I don't have the right words that you want to hear.
You don't know Ring of Fire?
I do, I just don't want to sing the verse.
You're horrible. Well, I thought I was going to get some fishing footage there. We didn't get a single bite, and then I had to call the trip. I had to call it quits early because Hadley was running a temperature. So basically, Big Bird and I just went on a hour-and-a-half long tour of the lake and listened to some music there for just a minute, and then we had to bolt. So with that said, welcome back to the channel. We did miss a video last week. We were out of town in unfortunate circumstances. We had a death in the family on my mom's side, and I wanted to be there to support that side of the family. I don't get to see them much, and I love that side so much. So we didn't film last week. So with that said, it is now Good Friday, so happy Easter weekend, everybody. And I tell you, my mind is just gone. I actually got up this morning, got dressed, went downtown, opened up the office to only find out that we were closed for Good Friday. So now we're actually headed to the post office because I'm super behind mailing out orders. So to anyone who has bought things, I do apologize. Being out of town last week kind of pushed all that back. So we're back with a new video. I think it's going to be a good one. I still get a lot of questions from people who are new or might be struggling with a few things. So without too much more rambling, here are 5 things you might be doing wrong in your soft plastic bait making. Well, I've got to show you guys one more thing. These are sort of like some blood minnows, and it's using these 2 colors right here. Merlot Red, GC47. So the GC47 is a hyper shift, and I've kind of mixed it with some black to get that smoked top. That Merlot Red line, of course, and then just straight swim bait plastic for the belly. Okay, so this is going to sort of be an all-inclusive video. This isn't just specific to injection or hand pouring or any one method in general. We're going to kind of go over a lot of common mistakes and things that I think people do wrong and that their process can be better on. So right now, we're going to show you number 1, Plastisol Preparation. This is going to be split up into 2 parts. The first part, of course, is getting the plastic mixed up. Okay, so we've talked about this a lot on this channel. You have to mix plastic, all right? So the best way is with a variable speed drill and a large paint mixer if you're doing the 5-gallon bucket thing. Now this bucket you can see has not been mixed in a while. That's why I chose it, so that we can really watch this happen, all right? And you don't want to go full speed because then you'll agitate the plastic. You're going to mix in a lot of bubbles, and that's just going to cause a lot of extra bubble trouble, headache. But basically, we want to get all the resins mixed in, right? Even though that looks mixed up, you probably want to do it a little bit more, because if your resin to plasticizer ratio is off, you know, your plastic is never really going to come out of gel phase, and it's going to be gooey, sticky, and tacky. So if you've ever seen posts on Facebook or in any soft bait forums where somebody's having sticky baits, they did not prepare the plastic right. I don't care if it's this plastic, Plastisol, Calhoun, who else? MF, ColorTech. They all have to be stirred. They all have largely the same properties. So we're going to keep stirring here. And that's pretty much all she wrote. So before we move on, I do want to reference and point you guys and gals in the direction of a small playlist that I do have on this channel. It's called Quick Tips. It's only 2 videos, but it's all about Plastisol preparation. They're both maybe 5 to 6 minutes long a piece, and we go really, really in depth into mixing, not only in the 5-gallon buckets, but also a 1-gallon jug, right? What's the best way to mix up a jug without just agitating it, shaking it, right? And then we go really in depth into cooking the plastic, which to me is the #1 boo-boo that people make. You know, anyone can stir a jug, right? That's pretty basic. But cooking the plastic, understanding internal temperature versus top temperature, understanding when it's out of gel phase can be tricky. So anyways, if you want a little bit more in-depth information on this topic, check out my quick tips playlist. 2 videos, well worth your time. Okay, there it is. 1 cup of plastic in my little teeny tiny desktop 900 watt microwave. Okay, I want to do about 2.5 minutes of initial cook time, particularly with a soft blend like this. Okay, so a soft blend has a lot less resin, more plasticizer. You're more unlikely to scorch or burn softer durometers because there's less resin that can burn. So anyway, 2.5 minutes is going to get us mostly out of gel phase. All right, plastic is coming out right now. Let's see what we have. Yeah, looking good. Okay, so there it is. Okay, you can see that the top of the cup, right, nice and clear, looking good. However, let's see if I can change up our angle of perspective here. The bottom, well, yeah, you can't really tell. Basically, the bottom of the cup is not cooked. Okay, so one of the main keys to cooking a cup of plastic properly is getting the internal temperature on the bottom up to conversion temperature 350. So watch closely. Okay, I'm gonna mix this up. That bottom is still a little bit jelly. Okay, the bottom of the cup is not only still in gel phase, but not even close to being through gel phase. It's still a little bit milky, and that's okay, right? So the main thing to do, or to keep in mind, is that the bottom of the cup needs to be cooked to the same conversion temperature as the top. That's why Travis and the guys at Dead On, and generally throughout the whole industry, do not recommend surface IR guns. They want you to use an internal thermometer, which is the way to go. Now, I do not have an internal thermometer, so I'm not going to use the IR gun because Travis will kill me. But the same principle applies. Stir up the bottom contents of the cup because they are not done. Trust me. The only way those are going to be done on initial cook is if you cook the plastic too much and got everything too hot. Generally, that's also going to result in you overcooking the plastic. So, I mean, to cook it to the point to where even the bottom is done on initial cook means that you probably scorched the top, okay? So now this needs about another 25-30 seconds. All right, now let's take a look at what we've got. This cup is cooked all the way through, right? I can scoop off the bottom and it's just flowing like water, okay? So now I can either let it sit and these bubbles will rise to the top, or I can pop it into a vacuum chamber, which is what I'm going to choose to do. And then we're gonna talk a little bit about clarity. Okay, so this next part is sort of subjective. It's not necessarily on the list of things that people do wrong, but I get a lot of questions and I do want to talk about something, right? Look at this plastic. Looks kind of cloudy, right? If you graded this on a scale of 1 to 10 for clarity, it would rank pretty low. And a lot of that is just the damage that moisture over time does, right? My buckets are out here in this garage, and you know the garage is constantly getting hot, it's getting humid, it's raining outside, there's moisture in the air, all of which gets in those buckets, especially once you crack the lid. I don't care how well you put it back on. If your lid's constantly being open and closed, moisture is going to be a problem. So now that we've removed any of the air bubbles, that's what our raw plastic now looks like, okay? It doesn't look that great. However, one thing that I can say, and I don't know if this is only specific to Dead On, but it's definitely something that I have observed using Dead On plastics, is that, you know, the stuff actually cures a lot better than it sometimes looks after initial cook, okay? So there's what it looks like in the Ginger Ninja mold. All right, still pretty clear, right? Once you get it out of the cup, you can see it's relatively see-through. The point I want to make is we'll come back and look at this in an hour or two, and it's going to look like an absolute diamond is in this mold. 247. We'll come back here in a little bit, and yes, that's a Dumb and Dumber quote. You can't triple stamp a double stamp. And hopefully y'all didn't just hear my voice crack just then. Okay, so this next part, number 3, is very subjective, and some of you may disagree and light me up in the comments, and that's perfectly okay. This is more of just how I think about color building. But one of the things that I see people not necessarily do wrong, but struggle with in terms of new people who maybe don't have confidence in their colors and maybe just don't like the way that their colors are coming out. One thing that a lot of them are doing is over saturating stuff, okay? All right? So a lot of new guys, they put way too much pigment in. So let's do that. Let's just put way too much pigment in here, okay? All right, this is Green Pumpkin 109, one of my favorite colors. And this is something that I used to do so often, is just oversaturate my colors. And to the point to where they were so thick, they basically just looked like crayons, right? There was no light refraction. There was no illusion to it. And to me, they were just kind of just not very mature looking colors, okay? And so a lot of people who kind of struggle early on to get the color effect that they want, a lot of them are just simply adding too much color. And or they're adding too much flake, okay? So, right, this is actually a really pretty color. Watermelon, sort of watermelon blue, purple. It's a real common color. You can make this in a stickworm. You can make it in a lot of things, and to me it always looks really, really, really good, okay? So we'll add some small blue flake. This is also like a good base for like a tilapia worm color. Maybe add a little bit of gold, okay? So it's really, really, really pretty, even still, right? But you can see that it's just so thick that that flake doesn't really get a chance to shine, okay? So what we're gonna do is we're going to take this mold here. This is the Angling AI, I believe this is the shaky head worm mold. But basically, we're gonna run one mold in this really, really oversaturated stuff. All right, same color. Let's just do it, I think, how a more experienced bait maker would do it. Less saturation, really paying attention to how the color looks and how it's gonna look in the mold. You also have to know your mold. If it's gonna be a thin bait or a thick bait, that can determine how you want to build your color. Right, so for example, a thicker cavity bait, you actually need less pigment to get the same level of saturation as you would in a thin bait, where to get the same look, you would actually need more pigment because it's going to be a more see-through shape. So, you know, all of these things kind of come into play, and they're sort of in the back of your mind when you're doing this stuff. And, you know, that just comes with experience. Maybe some people have a different philosophy on it. That's just kind of the way that I've just come to do things over, golly, a long time now. So, anyway, that's looking much better. I think that's going to showcase the color much better. All right, so let's go ahead and put in our purple flake, then our blue flakes. This is the tiny stuff, the 0.008. Always like working with the small stuff. It's almost like adding a powder pigment. It's so fine. Yeah, beautiful. Okie doke. Alrighty, there we go. Now we're gonna run the same mold. Okay, drum roll, please. Here we go. These are the saturated ones. These are the less saturated ones. So, let's go ahead and look behind door number one. All right. Yes, that's exactly how I wanted it to look. Almost dull. The color is so saturated that to me you actually see the color less. Yeah, that's how a lot of my colors used to look when I started, right? Just saturated as can be. Doesn't mean that it's bad. I just think that it can be better. And hopefully I don't regret saying this if this one right here sucks. Yes, hopefully we can get it down there. Oh yeah, baby. Yeah. So let's sort of straighten them out a little bit. Notice how you can already see the color better. You can tell what the hue of that pigment is automatically better. You can see the glisten, like the flake glistens, shines more because it can. The light is able to penetrate the worm and show you how those flakes really look, right? Okay, so now let's get both sets out and do sort of a little comparison. Right, just different saturations. And that may just sound really dumb and basic and no kidding, but you know, this takes a long time sometimes to train your eye to want to build color like this. And that's, there again, a lot of this is subjective. But to me, there's no comparison which style of color building displays color better and just looks better. I would 100 times out of 100 buy this bag of worms over that. That doesn't even look like the same color, even though it is. And to me, that's just a very simple mindset difference in how you mix up your pigment. So that would be my advice for anyone new is don't oversaturate your pigments. You're actually going to lose out on a lot of what the color has to offer you. To me, that just has so much more going for it than that. You can see the color better, you can see your flake, and ultimately this catches my eye more than that as a potential buyer. Little update on our ginger ninjas there. So it is now 3:19, so it's been a little bit, and you can already see those things are pretty much crystal clear. You can barely tell there's any plastic in the mold. Okay, so next up, a lot of times people struggle with denting, okay? Denting is when an injection cavity doesn't quite fill out all the way and there's sort of a dimple in it, right? Almost like the plastic didn't fill in. And to me, this is mostly caused by a temperature differential in your plastic and the mold. It's cooling down too much, and when plastic cools rapidly, it shrinks in more, okay? The same way when you open pour into a hot mold and you let it cool slowly, you won't get that dimple in the top, right? You won't get that valley. As to where if you cool the mold too fast, the plastic shrinks in and draws in. Okay, so with that said, this is the Bass Tackle Zaco mold basically, and it is extremely prone to denting. A lot of that is the fact that it's top port injection, it's a really thick, wide belly, and it's an asymmetrical cavity. All of these factors add up to a nightmare for denting, okay? So this is a room temperature mold, which is what we'll call a cold mold. Now, depending on where you live, a cold mold could be 12 degrees or 98 degrees like it's often here. It kind of all has the same effect. Hot plastic going into a cold mold, especially if you don't take your time during the injection process, can lead to dents. So let's go ahead and run the mold cold, all right? And we're gonna make the mistake of injecting really fast, okay? Not holding pressure. We're just gonna pump that plastic in there and just move on, okay? Cold mold, hot plastic, injecting like a maniac, okay? To me, that's a recipe for denting. All right, let's roll this beautiful dent footage. And the reason why we chose black is because it hides nothing, okay? Black is brutal when it comes to not hiding imperfections. Okay, was that the wrong way? All right, so, whoops. Here we go. All we have to do is get you to see it from the right angle. How do I? Okay, there we go. You can see those dents there. Dent, 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 right? That little kind of crevice there. I believe there was one on that side too. Other than that, I actually really highly recommend this mold. It's a great mold. This is not knocking the mold. I just know that, yeah, see that? There's like a little dimple there where it's almost like it didn't quite fill. But if we look at that side, there's no such dimple, okay? Sorry, I'm trying to show you all this at these angles. That side filled in nice and round. That side has that dimple that you can see. Okay. All right. So here's what I recommend to mitigate this. Preheat the mold, okay? Put it on your pancake griddle, put it on your hot plate, throw it in the oven, whatever you need to do. How a lot of people actually preheat their molds and get the cold off of them is to do what we just did. Run some junk plastic through it. You know, we all have these giant piles, right, of remelt pucks. Well, heat up a lot of that stuff. Do a few rounds through your mold to get it hot, okay? Because the temperature differential usually causes that, okay? So now what we're going to do is, now that this mold is a little warm, we are now going to inject it again, but we're going to wait for the plastic to cool down to where it's a little more syrupy, right? The viscosity, okay? And then we're going to inject slowly and hold pressure and see if that comes out a little bit better. Okay, so if I look at this plastic here, it's actually running pretty thick. That's probably 330 or even lower, okay? So what we're going to do, we're going to inject it again, like I said, a little bit colder plastic. The mold is now a little bit more up to temp, okay? We're going to inject slow and hold pressure, okay? Lots of steady pressure. We really want to make sure that that mold fills out and that and that the plastic does not cool down too rapidly, okay? Rapid cooling, especially if the surface of the mold is still cold, quote unquote, to me is the #1 cause of unwanted dents. Okay, so these actually came out a little bit better. Only this one denting. You can see it there, okay? The other ones, yeah, maybe you could really critique them, but you can see the noticeable dent is there, just like one from the earlier round, okay? You can see a very noticeable dent. So, generally speaking, I would say the hotter your mold gets, in terms of it being closer to the same temperature as your plastic, and if you can inject your plastic at lower temperatures and inject as slowly as possible, I mean push it to where, I mean, you can barely even feel it moving. To me, that's going to give you the best, I think the best results. Now a mold like this, boy, it's really hard. Most molds are not going to give you quite this much trouble, but to me, that's my philosophy on how to reduce denting. Okay, next up, we're going to talk about hand pouring, and the biggest boo-boo that I see in hand pouring by far is molds not being hot enough. People pouring at too low of a temperature in terms of the temperature of the molds. You can see visible cold cracks, and you can just kind of tell by the way that the plastic flows if that mold was hot enough or if it was still too cold. Not to mention, there's always the risk of delamination. These are all things that are easily solvable by temperature. We've talked about this a lot on the channel. So what we're going to do is, instead of showing you the right way to do it, I'm going to show you what I think is not so much the right way to do it, and then compare it to some baits that we've already poured to show you these thermal differences. Okay, so I know that I kind of have a different hot plate than most. I've set it to 200 degrees just for this demonstration, okay? So 200 degrees on the thermostat here does not mean that the internal temperature or surface temperature of those molds is 200 degrees. That's what my thermostat on this fancy hot plate is reading. What the actual surface temperature of the mold is, I'm not really sure. It's definitely less than boiling temperature, which is 212. I consider molds mainly at full temperature, and you can see old watermarks there, when they'll boil water off the surface. I think a lot of people are pouring their molds before they're to that temperature, so that's what we're going to do in sort of this mock run, is we're going to pour molds that are hot, too hot to touch, right? Too hot to handle, but they're still too cold for what you want. Okay, here we go. This is actually a really great recipe. It is a morning dawn pattern in a swim bait. So just clear plastic on the bottom. Alright, looking good. Clear plastic on the bottom. And then we're going to do sort of a neo magenta bloodline or a vein, which is one of Dead-On's new colors. Then we're going to top it off with just straight black grape. Alright, now time for the veins. I'll just kind of show you one so that we're not out here all day. Because I feel like I've been out here all day. Okay? It never gets any easier to do on camera. Yeah, I think I royally messed that one up. I'll do another one. I'll do another one. Try not to over pour it. Okay. There we go. That one's a little bit better. Okay, last part. Here we go. Let's top one off. Really is a pretty color. Just morning dawn in a swim bait. And you could do it differently. You could make like more of a reddish bottom, then with the pink vein, then the dark purple top. I really like clear bellies on swim baits. That's my vice. But yeah, you know, me just doing this a lot, I can tell that the plastic just doesn't flow the same. It doesn't behave the same. The mold doesn't quite fill in the same, and these colors just don't quite thermally blend the same. Not to mention, no matter how long I let these cure, they will probably peel apart and do a little bit of delamination. And you'll get to a point in your hand pouring, you know, once you kind of figure out all these nuances, you'll be able to see pictures and photos of other people's work, and you'll be able to spot these things. You know, you can tell just by looking at a picture that bait's gonna peel apart. You know, when the end user puts a jig head into it, they're not gonna like what happens, and that's a shame because it's very, very preventable. All right, while those swim bait molds cool down, check this stuff out. Yes, sir. Absolute clear as it can get. Well, no, that's, you can't see. There's a good look at it. Not only is it clear, it's not cloudy, and there's zero yellowing. And I think those are all important characteristics, particularly when you're like me and you like to pour clear belly baits like we just did with those. Seeing something like that is very inspiring because it gives me the confidence that I'm going to get that crystal belly. Okay, there they are. Looking really good, actually. For only pouring these at 200, which, like I mentioned, is ultimately a little bit less than 200 inside the mold, you know, because heat is dispersed throughout the surface of the aluminum. So if we just take one out and look at it, you can see it filled in pretty good. Let's nitpick it though, okay? See this little ridge right here where the top kind of has a ridge? That's because the plastic is cooling down as that, basically as the cavity's filling up, resulting in little imperfections like that. If that mold was, now obviously we are splitting many hairs here, but I think all this stuff is important. If you're even going to start the hobby, do it at the highest level that you can. So stuff like that is a result of temperature. Also, let's look at how the vein pours, okay? Or, excuse me, let's look at how the vein goes into the tail. You can see it's a very defined line, and it sort of comes in and then angles down a little bit, right? So the vein is flat. Trying to get this in focus for you guys. The vein is flat, 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 and then you can kind of see it kind of curls down. That is a result of the belly plastic being poured into a mold that's not quite hot enough. Just the way that the plastic flows. The plastic flows straighter and more even and blends better when the mold is hot. And then here's the big kicker, right? No, sorry, got to get a different angle. Try not to make this part of the video too long. Here's the main kicker, okay? It's already delaminating. See that? So if we take this bait out, okay? And yes, I'm aware that they're not completely cured up yet. However, if they're going to split in half here, if they're going to peel here, they're going to peel later. It doesn't matter if you let them cure or not. you did not achieve a thermal blend. Sorry, I meant to say thermal bond. Alright, so this is really hard to do with one hand. Here we go. Right, that is coming apart way too easily. Now, in theory, cure this bait for a couple of days, it will not be this easy to peel apart. However, I think the bait is still fundamentally flawed whenever somebody goes to put a jig head in there or rigs it and, you know, puts the bait through a little bit of a test. They're going to start having this happen. And to me, that's just never what you want to do. Now let's compare it with these. These I poured to my normal process, and I think they're just a little bit better, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to get out one of the ones that we just did and put it up here with it, all right? Now these are obviously slightly different recipes poured on different days. However, look at the way that the vein runs. It's straight all the way through the back, okay? And that's true for all of them. Right, the vein goes straight all the way through. It doesn't have that dip down in the tail, okay? Straight all the way through. You can see this one today. The vein just doesn't quite come out as cleanly. And then not to mention, you know, we're still peeling apart with minimal effort there. So just little things like that, you can tell when they've been done correctly. And, you know, these are still okay. I would not sell these, of course, you know, for pouring baits for yourself. You know, we obviously didn't do a terrible job, but temperature is where people go wrong. A bait should never come apart all three layers, you know, like that. That means that none of these layers bonded up the way that we wanted. And you know, hey, I'm not saying that I don't still make mistakes like this. Now, having a hot plate that I can really dial in exact temperatures has virtually eliminated this. But back when I was still pouring on pancake griddles, even 3-4 months ago, this would still happen every now and then. That's why temperature, you have to pay attention. It is so important. And you know, I can just take one look at those and tell the molds weren't quite hot enough. You know, we didn't do it as a complete joke and pour them at 100 degrees, because I think most people have more sense than that. They're getting them hot, but just not hot enough sometimes, to me, is the difference in this and this. Okay, I'm tired, but I hope y'all found this video useful, insightful, hopefully a little entertaining, and a little all of the above. And again, happy Easter, everyone. I don't know if this video is coming up the day that I'm filming this part, or maybe on Easter itself, or maybe the Monday after Easter. But anyway, see you guys in the next video. Like, subscribe, notification bell, and keep tilting those cups.